Today I want to talk to you about 4 steps to focus. So specifically I want to talk to you about what are the 4 steps that we need to take into consideration when we want to enhance our focus, whether that's within the context of ADHD or in the general population, right, without ADHD. So the first step to focus is organization. So organization really refers to the planning, scheduling, and having a really good understanding and a really good grasp on what are those tasks that we want to carry out and what are those subtasks that we can divide each of those tasks in, right? And in what period of time ideally do we want to work on a specific subtask. So it's really having a very good plan, a really good schedule, really good calendar system that allows us to break complex tasks down into very specific, small, actionable steps. Right? Without that, you can imagine if you just have a very large task in mind, we can't execute that in one go, right? Often we need to take steps A, B, C, D, and multiple other steps in order to work towards a complex goal. Often within ADHD, that breaking down tasks into sub-steps and planning then those sub-steps and thinking about how much time we would likely need to complete each of the sub-steps is more difficult, right? So that's objectively more difficult for people with, for example, inattentive ADHD. That, however, doesn't mean that people with inattentive ADHD cannot learn to do these things better, right? Those skills and those habits can be extended, can be enhanced with sufficient practice. It's not something that will change from one day to the next, but if we keep practicing our planning, our organization, that can really change our focus a lot and kind of really improve our focus at work, but also at home significantly. And then the second step to focus is what I call Zoom. So Zoom refers to the ability to really focus in on a specific task or a specific stimulus or thing that we want to pay attention to, that we want to work on, right? So for example, if I'm working on writing a chapter for my book, then I want to zoom in on writing, on that writing document, right? And I don't want to be distracted by messages popping up on my phone or by email notifications popping up on my computer screen, etc., or by the noise that's coming from the neighbor's house. I really want to zoom in on that task at hand. So really that narrowing of attention spatially towards one specific goal or one specific stimulus. So again, that can be practiced, and again, that's something that is a bit more difficult for people with inattentive ADHD. But again, zooming in on something that is the main topic of our focus is really something that we can learn. So it directly relates to being less distractible, right? So if we zoom in, distracting stimuli, distracting events will less readily attract our attention, right? So our attention can then be more strongly focused, less interrupted on the task at hand, and we're not as affected by what's going on around us in the periphery, right? A third step to focus is directly related to that second step. That second step is Zoom, right? But then the question is, what happens when something else does attract our attention, right? So what happens if the message tone on your phone does attract your attention and kind of diverts attention away from, let's say, that manuscript that you're working on, right? Or that work email that you're sending. What we need to focus on then is refocus, right? So I term this third step refocus, and that's really the ability to redirect our attention to the task that we want to work on after we've been distracted, after our attention has been dragged to something else, right? So while Zoom is really focusing in on the task at hand, refocus is really that question of our attention has been directed elsewhere. Now we want to move it back to the primary task, and how do we do that? We see that this is something that's really, really difficult and really quite strongly affected in people with inattentive ADHD. So Zoom is affected a little bit in people with inattentive ADHD. They struggle a bit with that zooming in, but they struggle very, very strongly in general as a group. Of course, this does not apply to everyone, but when we look at group averages, people with inattentive ADHD really struggle with that refocusing. So once, for example, their phone has distracted them, they stay on their phone for a longer period of time than people without inattentive ADHD, right? So it's really important that when you have inattentive ADHD, that we work on strategies, that we work on developing skills to refocus again, right? To take that attention away from the distracting task and refocus it at the task at hand, the one that we want to be focusing on. And then finally, the fourth step is refresh. So refresh refers to kind of an overall kind of baseline level of focus and attention. And this is strongly correlated with levels of burnout. So when we're quite burned out, when we're quite exhausted overall, then our levels of refresh are quite low, right? We're quite exhausted, our attention resources are quite low. Only if something minor happens, our attention gets attracted by it, etc. We don't have as much cognitive control. We don't have as much kind of effortful prefrontal cortex resources as we might have when we're better rested, right? This is something that we can work on as well. It's more of an overarching thing. So overall, my recommendation would be start with one of the specific steps. So with organization, with Zoom, or with refocus. And once we work on those, that will also affect that refresh step, right? But you can also directly affect or influence refresh. For example, by setting clear boundaries between home and work life, if work causes you quite a bit of stress and quite a bit of burnout, exhaustion, etc. So setting really clear boundaries, making sure you make time in your schedule for some small activities that recharge you, that you enjoy personally. Those kind of things really help with that refresh. Now, if you're more interested in further exploring your own profile, your own focus profile, right? And how you score in terms of these 4 steps, what are your strengths and what are your areas that you can work on a bit more, you can take my quiz. I have developed a Score app quiz online that's evidence-based, based on best practice research, and that gives you more information about which of these 4 domains, organization, Zoom, refocus, and refresh, are your strengths, and which ones are your areas of current limitation or current weakness. When you look at the website, you can simply click on the link. Once you click on the link, it takes you to a starting screen where you simply enter your name, your email address, and what it will do is it will send you a link with an overview of your scores to your personal email address afterwards. You will also be able to see a short summary on the screen afterwards, but you will have that in your email inbox as well to reflect on later on or to refer to later on again. There are 12 questions in the quiz, so it doesn't take very long. On average, it takes people about 1 minute and 9 seconds to complete all 12 of the questions. And afterwards, you get a diagram like this one on the screen here that basically shows you how do you score for organization, how do you score for Zoom, how do you score for refocus, and how do you score for refresh. It also gives you an overall score So your overall focus score, as well as a score for each 4 of those subdomains of focus. It firstly gives you your area of limitation, and then it ends with your strongest